Welcome to the Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2030. In mid-2017, representatives from NGOs, labor, academia, business, government, and other stakeholders came together to explore ways of encouraging more open conversations about creating a South African society that is increasingly inclusive, prosperous, and successful.
At these initial meetings, it was asked, what would it take to create a process to allow South Africans to develop a greater sense of common purpose and create more of a shared national vision that builds on an appreciation of our diversity as South Africans? The name Indlulamithi, the Nguni word for giraffe, which literally translated means above the trees, was adopted for the project. Scenarios-based strategic planning asks participants to take a longer-term view, imagining possible futures beyond the confinement of the immediate future. We decided to look forward to 2030.
A multifaceted research process including more than 60 in-depth interviews with sectoral leaders drawing on recent research and recent scenario exercises such as the Vumelana Land Scenarios and a number of commissioned research papers was initiated. 25 key variables that we think capture South Africa's current reality and which will each shape South Africa's future were developed.
Each of these 25 variables has a more in-depth rationale and explanation which can be accessed at sascenarios2030.co.za. The various research papers that deepened our understanding of these variables are also available on the website. You can also read the full text of the scenarios here in the free Indlulamithi Scenarios 2030 booklet.
The research and scenario building process has been facilitated by the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection on behalf of a broad group of stakeholders. A full list of everyone involved is available on the website.
The Indlulamithi team encourages you to use these scenarios and our materials in your planning processes. These scenarios can facilitate greater civic involvement and more clarity about what South Africa needs to do, from bottom up and top down, to change our trajectory as a nation. A focus on social cohesion emerged from initial meetings of stakeholders. While participants flagged growing our economy and creating jobs as vital for South Africa's future, many also argued that unless social cohesion in its various dimensions is addressed more directly, be it through reconciliation or addressing inequality or crafting more of a sense of national identity and solidarity, our economic development strategies will flounder.
After a number of focus groups and meetings, this is the key question that the Indlulamithi project focuses on. What would a socially cohesive South Africa look like? And to what degree is it attainable by 2030? While acknowledging that social cohesion has a critical economic component, because economic exclusion undermines people's ability to participate fully in society, the project developed a broader definition of this key term.
Social cohesion refers to levels of integration and inclusion in communities and in society at large. What is it that continues to exclude people in South Africa? In other words, what prevents social cohesion and how can we tackle that?
Social cohesion also reflects various measures of participation or non-involvement in social organizations or institutions. It's shaped by disparities in income and wealth, as well as by levels of interpersonal and intergroup trust.
Crime rates and frequencies of violence, as well as the overall well-being and the general health of populations, are often mirrored in measures of social cohesion. It is important to stress that our notion of social cohesion, in line with global thinking, is often encapsulated via expressions of common values and expressed in senses of nationhood and of shared ethics and ideals.
Part of what this scenarios exercise is trying to do is imagine what social cohesion is and what we want it to be, and how through our work, institutions, civil society formations, political parties, and the general public, we are actively able to shape our future. In other words, this is also about envisioning, looking above the trees, imagining, creating or recreating more shared ideals, more common language to describe these ideals, and more agreement on parts needed to create a more cohesive country. We combined the 25 variables and consolidated these into 3 themes or key driving forces that we believe are likely to be the most significant shapers of South Africa's social cohesion over the next decade. The 3 key drivers are social inequality, institutional and leadership capacity, and resistance, resentment, and reconciliation.
For the first driver, social inequality is a broad measure of many things, not just a narrowly economic driver. For example, many people in South Africa live far from economic centers with high transport costs. As South Africa becomes more urbanized, inequality between rural and urban dwellers, as well as between different provinces, is deepening. There are many other kinds of inequality too, including strong gender inequalities in South Africa in terms of pay, status, and social mobility.
Unemployment and underemployment are important generators of inequality. About a third of South Africans who want to work cannot find work. The unemployment rate has been rising sharply since 2009.
Of great concern is South Africa's very high rates of youth unemployment. By some measures, South Africa's rates of youth unemployment are the worst in the world, outdoing even countries such as Spain and Greece.
Many countries in Africa have far lower rates of unemployment and much higher growth rates than South Africa. What can we do to change this?
This contributes to a reality where only about 10% of South Africans own more than 90% of available wealth when measured by assets, such as owning land, or owning a house, or owning shares in public companies, or having savings in the bank.
Many, but not all, of this 10% of the population who own 90% of the available wealth are white and male. Wealth distribution is highly racialized in South Africa and also has enduring and deep gender dimensions. How do we shift this?
Inequality of income is also a deep and difficult problem in South Africa. We have one of the biggest gaps between the rich and the poor in the world. Unfortunately, this gap has also widened in the past decade. Because of relative lack of assets and this big gap between the rich and the poor, the position of the South African middle class, except for the very wealthy, is often insecure and volatile.
The second key driver, institutional and leadership capacity, is a variable that runs through society and not being limited just to the state and government. This KDF manifests itself partly in the strategic capacity of South Africa's leadership to appreciate the collective interest and work to realize it. But it also asks, how can we as South Africans build stronger organizations and ensure greater institutional capacity through clean government and rigorous accountability? The third key driving force is entitled Resistance, Resentment, and Reconciliation, and reflects the research process that shows there is a heightened sense that as South Africans, we do not have enough of a shared understanding of our history.
Nor do we agree on who has or has not benefited from the transition from apartheid to democracy. Many South Africans have said they don't believe that democratic South Africa belongs to them, and they talk about and describe mechanisms of exclusions that make them feel unheard. During the Indlulamithi research, This was often coupled with expressions of resentment against those who were perceived to have benefited unfairly since 1994.
As one participant argued, South Africans have many silent non-agreements. There are some underlying conflicts we do not speak of, so as not to upset the transition. This KDF takes note of the ongoing mobilization around a sense of woundedness and resentment, as well as around ethnicity and culture. South Africa's future will play out in a global and continental context, which will shape, constrain, or expand our local choices. These three key driving forces were examined in the context of what we've identified as 6 global megatrends. Environmental changes, including increasingly severe shifts in global climate patterns, long-term temperature increases, and more ruined environments. How will this impact on South Africa going forward? What can we do about this?
A second global megatrend is the shift away from fossil fuels and the carbon economy, and growing pressure for all countries to conform to lower carbon emission standards. How will this impact on South Africa?
The third megatrend that is impacting directly on our choices in South Africa is the continuing exponential advance of computer processing power, leading to rapid changes in the machine learning and artificial intelligence. This fourth industrial revolution is likely to see much more automation of manufacturing and service work. Will that help South Africa's social cohesion or cause more difficulties?
Another very important megatrend is the geopolitical shifts to a more multipolar world as China's economy and military prowess continues to grow. India too becomes more populous and powerful. China will move past the USA as the world's biggest economy before the end of the 2020s. How do we fit into these shifting global realities?
Rising consumer debt levels globally and the possibility of severe economic shocks, such as another global stock market crash, might undercut the projections for steady global economic growth in the medium term.
Africa's population is growing faster than other regions of the world. How will rapid population growth and shifts in demographics and stability of democracies across the African continent, but particularly our neighboring countries, impact on South Africa?
Combining the KDFs and these global and continental megatrends, we developed 3 stories, 3 scenarios about South Africa's future. The first scenario is the Bourgeois scenario, about an enclave bourgeois nation which captures the loose-limbed, jumpy country that we become. A country torn by deepening social divides, daily protests, and cynical self-interest.
In this scenario, the Chief Justice of South Africa in 2030 is getting ready for one of the biggest events of his life.
The past. The past is a foreign country. Yes, that's it. Who was that comedian? Booming infrared motion detection, anti-intruder technology.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Friends of the Indlulamithi Scenarios 2030 initiative. Please bear with us. We're running behind schedule, but I understand that our guests have arrived. They're just moving down the corridor. So please be patient. They will be arriving and shall be starting soon. Thank you.
Haven't made it. Oh, that reminds me. Good morning, Alexa. What is the weather report for today? Alexa?
Partly cloudy, with a mild northeasterly breeze.
Thank you, Alexa. And what is the protests report for the day?
Scattered rocks and stones, and a lot of smoke rising from barricades. Avoid the N1, M1, N3, N2, N14, N12, and N17. Would you like me to
The past. The past. The past is another country. Is that right? Another country or foreign country? The past is a foreign country. Yes, 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 that's it.
Good evening once again. I'm so sorry for that delay and the technical glitch, but we are about to start now, and our guests are finally here. But to allow them to move in, can we please stand up so that we can allow the Honorable Chief Justice to be seated? Please be seated. My name is Xolelwa Kashekadia. I am the Director of Project Management at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. I'm also a member of the steering committee of the Indlulamithi Scenarios. We'd like to welcome you to this first anniversary of the launch of the Indlulamithi Scenarios. It's been exactly 1 year today since we launched the scenarios, and today's program entails a progress report of what we've been doing over the past year. We will have also some presentations in terms of our most recent findings. However, we might have to adjust the program because we've started late, and also one of our presenters has to catch a flight to the US. So please bear with us as we make those adjustments. But thank you very much for joining us today. What we're going to do right now, we're going to welcome Mr. Indlulamithi to do the official welcome and opening.
Honorable Chief Justice Mogoeng, dignitaries, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. We are gathered here today, once again, a year later, following the successful launch of the Indlulamithi Scenarios 2030 on the 21st of June 2018. 21 June 2018 was an important moment in our country where we witnessed the launch of the Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2030. On that occasion last year, we were taken on a journey where we were invited to suspend judgment, lift our gaze, think collectively and imaginatively about the possible futures that South Africa could face by the year 2030. At the heart of the Scenarios 2030 work was to ask and answer one critical question: what would a socially cohesive South Africa look like? And to what degree is this attainable by 2030? On that day, we unveiled 3 scenarios. We outlined the genesis of the Indlulamithi project, the processes that were undertaken, and the journey that was undertaken to get to the point of arriving at the scenarios. For all those who attended the event that day, you will remember vividly and fondly the dancers who showed us through the magnificent display of their dance moves the following possible scenarios the enclave bourgeoisie nation called Isbujwa, the nation in step with itself called Nile Walk, the floundering false dawn called Gwara Gwara. It is fair and correct to say that these are not the only possible scenarios that are possible. The purpose of the Indlulamithi work is to stimulate discussion, conversation, ignite debate, and trigger action by all South Africans to work together in creating a socially cohesive society. In the way in which we assembled the core participants, we intentionally and deliberately invited representation from trade unions, government, political parties, the private sector, the civil society, academia, faith-based organization, and the youth. A year has passed since that important day, all thanks to those who attended and supported and contributed immensely, directly, indirectly, to make that day the success that it became. We must also salute, give credit, recognition to Indlulamithi Leadership Group and the co-participants in the diligent work they undertook, asking critical and profound questions which helped to mold, formulate, and craft the final version of the scenarios that we now have before us today. It has been a great journey of discovery and introspection. The June 2018 launch of the Indlulamithi Scenarios was followed by the dedicated Indlulamithi team who crisscrossed the country to engage with a variety of stakeholders across the board, eliciting their views, comments, and contributions on the scenarios. The stakeholders that we engaged challenged the scenarios, enriched the content of the variables, the key driving forces, and these insights were all considered in the final book that is being released today. We came back from such engagements with a deep, renewed sense that we as South Africans have within us the ability to imagine a different future which we all need to work towards together as a collective to make it possible, achievable, and realizable. Today, we'd like to thank you for your attendance and support. We welcome you to the first anniversary of Indlulamithi South Africa Scenarios 2030, which we have termed Indlulamithi Day. The plan going forward is to reflect every year on this date on the trends in society to indicate to us all in which scenario we are gravitating towards. Today, we are launching the Indlulamithi Barometer. We will also be launching the Indlulamithi book. All this underlies the serious commitment that we all have of forging ahead with a new determination, vigor, and resolve to create a better country, a better society for us all. Please feel free. You are welcome to this auspicious event to witness and enjoy today's proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andile. Andile is the captain at Anglo-American, one of our sponsors of the Indlulamithi initiative. We are supposed to have a safety briefing, but I'm very mindful of the time. And I'm thinking about skipping that, but can we skip the safety briefing? I'm worried about Tara. Okay, the book that Andile mentioned is in the bags that you all have on your seats. That's the second edition of the Indlulamithi booklet. We used to call it a booklet, but I think now it is growing into a book. We also have on these, I don't know what you call them, table placement, things that's supposed to have your names on it, where you can follow us, those are on social media, at SA Scenarios 2030, and the hashtags are hashtag Indlulamithi 2030, hashtag Imagine 2030, hashtag Indlulamithi. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, so you can start tweeting. Just a bit in terms of housekeeping. Those who are media representatives, there is a media room across the corridor. So if you're walking towards the escalator on your right-hand side, it's marked, I think it's supposed to be ops room, but it's actually the media room. The toilets are further down the corridor, just before you get to the escalators. Also, those who do not have parking vouchers, please make sure you go and collect those from the registration table. Without wasting any more time, I'm going to invite Dr. Somadoda Vikeni, who is a special advisor to the Vice Chancellor at the University of South Africa, who is going to give us a brief overview of how the project evolved. Welcome, Dr. Vikeni.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings to you all, especially the Chief Justice. I was told, because of the strictness of time, I would not have to be greeting and recognizing everyone, because I asked them if it was inclusive. Andle has already assisted a great deal to say, where are we and what have we done since we last met? Our undertaking when we started this project was to say we will learn from other scenario exercises. Our undertaking was to say sustainability of our intervention, to make sure that our impact is felt not just once, but over time. Amidst a country which is obsessed with headlines, noisy, argumentative democracy, as I normally say, amidst a number of political developments, we undertook this exercise of Indlulamithi at the time when ANC had not gone to elections, at the time when elections had not taken place, the presidents had not changed hands, and indeed, it is very important to say that our undertaking was to make sure that we follow up and we sustain, we learn from other scenarios. What have we done? The first thing we've done was to continue with the stakeholder engagements, to make sure that we are going to be getting more input in order to feed into a longer narrative than the booklet that we had. The second one was the wind tunneling. Quite consciously, we were looking and engaging different sectors so that they can use the tool of scenarios, of strategic thinking about the future. In your books, you'll see the range of stakeholders that we have engaged. More importantly, among those, even the national intelligence community of South Africa, they said this is the kind of work we are looking at. They invited us to say the risks as they are emerging. And only 2 weeks ago, when the KZN legislature was doing its induction, they invited us and they said they so love this work, they want partnership. So it is the kind of wind tunneling for the private sector, for the public sector, for the different sectors and the different stakeholders. And also, we have partnered with GIBS, which is the business school of the University of Pretoria, in holding a number of stakeholder engagement, in holding a number of discussions with different groups, experts, as well as ordinary people. I won't go through the list of those. We have now solicited the expertise, or we are partnering with Deloitte to do, among other things, the refinement of the tools that we have, especially the scenarios as a tool to improve strategy planning for the nation and the individual organizations, because the question that we've been coming across each time we meet with different groups, how can this work for us? How do we respond to these scenarios? Should scenario A, scenario B, scenario C happen? And also, the choices that are to be made, we can only improve them if the various stakeholders are actually understanding what the scenarios are. And the one thing we always explain to them, scenario is not the kind of an inevitable future. That's why we present scenarios. The intervention of each and every one of us, of each and every sector, is the one that is going to tilt the nation towards a better scenario. But if we choose to do nothing, that's when things do happen. And also, the issue of a social compact, whether those compacts are in various sectors, in various communities, because that is what is going to assist us achieve the social cohesion, achieve the goals that we talk about, and overcome the challenges that we often face. And also the accessibility of scenarios to all communities, as I have indicated. The revision of scenarios as we started, we said this exercise is an exercise of co-creation. That's why each booklet will always be reflecting some of the things that we are doing or the input that we're getting from the communities. You will also notice that largely we do have the economic challenges that we face as a country are central, whether you are listening to the State of the Nation address or you talk inequality, unemployment. Fundamentally, those are economic issues. That's why economic modeling is becoming a critical element of our exercise. Hence, we have solicited the work and the expertise of Applied Development Research Solutions, ADRS, to help us with economic modeling techniques to develop policy scenarios and the projections of key economic and development indicators, and also to firm up the underlying economic factors that could shape the scenarios that we are referring to. Of course, the barometer that Andile alluded to is one very important intervention for this exercise to say each year, periodically, which direction are we taking? Therefore, which scenario are we beginning to drift towards? And that helps because it will help us to make necessary interventions. It will help the policymakers, it will help the investors, it will help the business community and different role players to forever be engaged in this strategic thinking about the future. So the annual assessment is one very important intervention these scenarios have, something that we have not seen with many other scenarios, upfront saying we will have this particular, barometer. When we started, it was 12 years away, and 2030 will now be almost 10 years away. Each year, we will be giving a signal as to which scenario we are following. And with all that, we will simply extend to each and every one of you representing your different sectors, your participation your support of this project so that it is not something that is a once-off event that we've seen other scenarios. They are launched, people hear, and they no longer hear anything again, because the scale of crisis that we're facing will need each and every one of us to put their shoulder on the wagon. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Fikeni. And now, without wasting any more time, I'm going to call Dr. Tara Ngwato, who is going to show us, or well, unveil the results of the first year since the launch of Indlulamithi. So we look forward to it. Welcome, Tara.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Chief Justice. It's a great pleasure to be here to introduce the Indlulamithi Barometer. Can we have the slides? Excuse me, can we have the presentation, please? The great value of scenarios, what makes them powerful tools for decision-making, is that they combine storytelling and hard facts. So the storytelling, it links to our emotions and it allows us to feel what it would be like in the scenarios that we're aiming for or that we're hoping to avoid. And the hard facts ensure that we keep our stories realistic, that we have a shared basis for a conversation across a wide range of groups in society, and that we can regularly check our biases and our assumptions against something concrete. And so when we track the scenarios, we have to keep the power of both the storytelling and the factual basis. The annual Indlulamithi tracking process, therefore, has two components. One based on perceptions about key events of the year, and one based on clearly defined empirical indicators. Both are equally valid, both tell us important things and both inform our decision-making. They just tell us about our experiences as a country in different ways. So let's start with perceptions. Perceptions are crucial. Most decisions are made based on perceptions rather than on facts, and I think we all know that. So as we ask whether we are moving towards or away from social cohesion, we must understand the events that shape how South Africans feel about the country and the extent to which those feelings are shared or deeply divided. So the first part of our tracking process is a video about the year that was. And what this does is it summarizes key events in the past 12 months that have elicited strong emotions about the country, either that bring people together in a collective experience, or that have pulled us apart as we interpret events in wildly different ways. We engaged with the Indlulamithi Leadership Group, who you've seen something about, over 30 senior thought leaders. We also engaged with almost 200 young people across the country. And to some extent, we've engaged with you, so I hope some of you filled in the little survey that you got as part of your RSVP emails. So we asked everyone what the events were that fundamentally shaped their perspective about South Africa in the past year. So this is what you and what they told us.
One year ago, some of South Africa's brightest minds got together, stuck their heads over the trees, and took a long look into the future, all the way to 2030. Then they sat back down, and after much discussion and arguing, they came up with 3 possible scenarios for South Africa. Isipujwa describes a South Africa torn by deepening social divides, daily protest, and cynical self-interest. Naile Walk describes a South Africa with growing social cohesion, economic expansion, and a renewed sense of constitutionalism. And Gwara Gwara describes a demoralized land of disorder and decay. Now, 1 year later, it's time to take a look at which direction South Africa is going. Welcome to the first annual Indlulamithi Scenarios Review, and it's certainly been a busy year. So, Let's bring up the confidence meter and see which events have affected South Africans' sense of confidence and cohesion over the past 12 months. First up, institutional capacity and leadership is a major headline that incorporates government, business, and civil society. Let's break it down. The endless stream of revelations about state capture and corruption has serious implications for the country, pushing down the confidence meter sharply. Eskom, Transnet, Bosasa, and other major scandals being exposed at the Zondo Commission have certainly added impetus to this downward swing. But, on the other hand, seeing the Commission do its work unimpeded is a positive sign, with corruptors and corruptees both in the spotlight. The 2019 national elections also had its pluses and minuses. Divisive and negative campaigning, along with the ugly factionalism in both the ANC and DA, have put pressure on confidence. Adding to the negative sentiment was a greater degree of political polarity, exemplified by increased support for the EFF and Freedom Front Plus. However, the elections were mostly peaceful, efficiently run and credible, so that was good. On the flip side, the VBS Mutual Bank was looted and collapsed, with serious consequences for politics and investors, big and small, around the country. Then there's load shedding, a dark cloud and national depressant that illuminates, or not, the precarious state of many essential SOEs. Infrastructure is also under threat, with the growing municipal water quality and sanitation crisis starting to affect the health of people and impact the environment. However, an official climate change policy was published, which shows some long-term policy planning. Finally, we have the phrase, land expropriation without compensation, which is either a terrifying confidence breaker or the prerequisite for real reconciliation, depending on your perspective. Our second headline is social inequality, in terms of access to the economy, healthcare, food, and so on. And it's mostly bad news here. The cost of living has gone up thanks to the VAT increase, oil price volatility, widespread drought, and other factors. The most recent General Household Survey shows that almost 20% of households are relying on grants as their main source of income. The unexpectedly steep drop of 3.2% year-on-year economic growth in the first quarter of 2019 was another gun punch. And the youth unemployment rate keeps shifting upwards, higher than any other country, with serious implications for the future. On the plus side, 50% of the new cabinet are women. That's gender parity in action. And our policies on the reproductive rights of women remain strong and unchallenged, unlike the regressive steps being taken in other parts of the world. The third headline is resistance, resentment, and reconciliation. Let's start with the good stuff. Our cultural ambassadors are making a great impression overseas. Apart from superstar Trevor Noah, Pearl Thusi was in the US series Quantico. Black Panther actors John Kani, Atando Akani, and Connie Chume brought isiXhosa to Wakanda, and Shoma Josie was a BET nominee. There was also massive support for Caster Semenya in her testosterone battle against the IAAF, showing we still support our sporting heroes, and that we are opening up the national conversation about gender identity and sexuality. Banyana are even getting equal pay with their male counterparts. That's quite a milestone. The election outcome was another confidence booster. People and the markets like the new press and want to give Ramaphosa's new dawn a chance. But it's not all sweetness and light. Widespread xenophobic violence continues, particularly against long-distance truckers. The Alexandra uprising is also ongoing, and protest action around the country is both more prolific and, it seems, more prone to turn violent. South Africans clearly need to find ways to express greater social solidarity and to help each other over what might be a challenging period. So, there you have it. The main events and drivers of the South African experience over the past year. In addition, the Indlulamithi Barometer captures 52 hard indicators every year to track the scenarios. Take a look at the website for an update on which direction these indicators suggest we are moving. That's all we have time for right now, but we trust we've cleared everything up. Goodbye, and good luck out there.
So our confidence in the trajectory of the country has good reasons to fluctuate wildly, sometimes from day to day, from hour to hour. One day it feels like we're in one scenario, the next we're in another. So we need a basis to judge the events against and the emotional fluctuations against. So the second part of the Indlulamithi tracking process is a barometer. It takes a more long-term, empirically driven view by measuring a range of indicators which represent the key driving forces of the key scenarios that you've already heard about. It's very important to note that this barometer does not aim to provide a comprehensive picture of development in South Africa. It does not reproduce the thousands of indicators identified in the National Development Plan, for example. It's also not intended to be a standard internationally comparable index. It's not the Sustainable Development Goals indicators. It's not the Social Progress Index. It was specifically designed to reflect trends in terms of these three scenarios. So it answers the question, to what extent are the predictions of the different scenarios starting to come true? To achieve this, as the video says at the end, we've identified 52 indicators. These are divided according to the three key driving forces that underpin the scenario narratives. As you can see, each of the key driving forces has sub-dimensions within it. And within your booklet, from page 64 onwards, I think it is, there's a detailed table with all of the indicators listed, where they're coming from, and how they are defined. 42 of these indicators are quantitative. They draw on regularly published data sources. 10 are qualitative, and year on year, the Indlulamithi team looks at a scan of what's happening in the media and in the country and defines where we think those are. For each indicator, we have imagined what that particular part of the South African experience would feel like and would be like in each of the scenarios. And then we have established cutoff points. So as an example, GDP growth, if it's above 3.5%, it suggests to us that we are in the Nailiwak scenario. If it is under 2%, it suggests to us we are in Gwara, in between East Bourgeois. So this past year, 0.8%, squarely in the Gwara scenario. We have done that for all of the indicators. So what that does is it then gives us a story for each of the key driving forces, what percent of the indicators in each key driving force falls within each of the scenarios. I think it's also really important to say on what basis, compared to what, we have done these cutoff points. Some of them come directly out of the scenario narratives and come out of targets like the National Development Plan. So, for example, reductions in poverty, reductions in unemployment, and economic growth. Other indicators, we've compared South Africa to what the global average for upper middle income countries would be. And the logic there is that if we are in the Nailiwak scenario, we would want to be at or better than the average for upper middle income countries. If we are somewhat below that, we've said that that's East Bourgeois, and if we're quite significantly below that, it would be Gwara. So then each year, we look at the value, we identify the scenarios per indicator, and we add them together. So what are our findings for the past 12 months? First, let's look at the top line when we look at how people are feeling about the country. Resistance, resentment, reconciliation. There are 11 indicators here. We see that about half of the indicators point to the East Bourgeois scenario. And the rest are balanced almost equally on either side. So we have some good stories and we have some bad. Indicators for institutional capacity and leadership are similarly spread out. Slightly more of a trend towards the problematic Gwara story, but essentially quite solidly in East Bourgeois. Much more sobering and I think this links to everything that's been said so far, is the social inequality dimension. Here, when we compare ourselves with the targets we've set ourselves as a country, and when we compare ourselves with comparable countries across the globe, we really are very far behind. We see that the underlying socioeconomic conditions for the majority of South Africans in terms of employment, health, education, safety, are pulling us strongly into the worst case scenario. The one positive indicator, that little 5% in the corner there, is that overall life expectancy is rising, but everything else is far below where we would expect and where we would want to be. So what does this look like when we put it together for the country as a whole? What we do is we take the three key driving forces, and we weight them equally to give us a national story. And what that tells us is that we are teetering between Isibujwa and Gwara at the moment, with the social inequality driving the trend towards the worst case scenario. Here's another way of looking at the same thing. We see again resistance, resentment, reconciliation, and institutional capacity in the middle. Quite balanced between the three scenarios. It could go any way, right? There are trends in any of those directions. But as soon as we look at social inequality, it is pulling us, maybe it's stabbing us into the Gwara corner. So these are our findings in terms of where we are now. It's quite sobering. So where are we going to go from here? Let's come back to perceptions. So we asked the leadership group, we asked young people, we asked all of you, where you think the country is going in terms of each of the key driving forces. Interestingly, the largest proportion of respondents felt that institutional capacity and leadership were getting stronger, were getting better. And I'm sure that the elections have increased our confidence in that direction in particular. The same proportion of respondents, though, felt that social inequality was getting worse. So we're digging ourselves even further into the hole that we're already in. We are pulling ourselves even further into the worst case scenario. A point of hope at the end is that there's a very interesting sense of balance between the three types of engagement or disengagement identified by the scenarios: resistance, resentment, reconciliation. Among the more senior respondents, the leadership group, most of the people who responded from this group here, there was virtually no one who saw any sense of reconciliation. But when we looked at the youth respondents, almost a quarter of them saw reconciliation in the future. And that really is a very positive, hopeful sign. The barometer is designed to focus us on where we are so that we can have a conversation about where we want to go from here. As we hang in the balance between Isibujwa and Gwara, the question is, how do we get to the socially cohesive Nailewok from here? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tara Ngwato, for that very sobering presentation. I know you are in a hurry to be elsewhere, but thank you very much for being here and giving us your time. We trust that you will not miss your flight. Now that we've seen where we are since 21st of June 2018, you urged us to monitor, and Dr. Ngwato has already given us a sense of where we are. But also another request that came from our stakeholders was that maybe we need to strengthen or support the economic underpinnings that we wrote about in our scenarios, because others were questioning some of the figures that we were throwing around. So in order to support our scenarios, we then commissioned Dr. Aska to help us through the process of economic modeling. He is from the ADRS, which is a US-based institution. He is going to do his presentation on economic modeling that is related to our policy scenarios. Welcome, Dr. Asker.
Well, good evening, Honorable Chief Justice, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ms. Kashikatia, Mr. Wandile, and Professor Fikini. It's been a pleasure to work with a very, exciting team that has been tirelessly working on this Indlulamithi project. It's been one of a very exciting project that I have been involved in. So I'm going to start with with this. Since last year, one of the areas that we started to look at was looking at the issue of what economic policy choices and outcomes underlie the three Indlulamithi scenario, in order to, with the intention of providing you with the kind of like a policy roadmaps to these three scenarios, economic policy roadmaps to these three scenarios. So in order to do that, we use the economic model of South Africa. It's a model that has been built over a number of years, and it's built to replicate the working of the South African economy in terms of production, distribution, the labor market, private sector decisions and investment, household decisions, demand and supply. All of these are captured basically in the model brought in together to develop a system that is less complicated than the reality, but it is able to capture replicate the working, the dynamic of the economy. And one of the advantages of this model that we use is that it's a model that also looks at, integrates the working of the impact of the macroeconomic evolution of the macroeconomy on individuals and households' welfare, and the changes in the welfare of of households and individuals on the economy. So it's what is called a linked macro-micro model. So it is not just a macro model that we're looking at, because we are interested on how as we are in these scenarios, we are looking at not just the macroeconomic indicators, but the poverty distribution impact of this scenario. So when the economy, for example, generates more employment, higher growth, better jobs, it distributes it to the households, to the unemployed in the households. Those households are become, some move out of poverty, demand for social grants goes down, taxation goes up, and then these are collected and then feed into the macro model. If the economy goes the other way around, we have an increase in the unemployment, increase in the demand for social security, higher cost for that, and that feeds into the economy, and obviously the poverty distribution effects of this dynamic. So on the one hand, the model replicates this, but what we use it for is to be able to do what-if scenarios. Because we are interested to know how can we affect the direction of the economy. It's complicated, but we are building we're using a model in order to be able to help us do what-if scenario around policies, around interventions, around shocks to the economy, simulate that effects, and see whether it is going, what direction it's going, whether those interventions are sufficient, whether it's taking us where we like to go. So it provides projections of key indicators, economic and development indicators, to give us an indication of whether those what-if scenarios around various micro social policies and other interventions are enough, or they, where they're taking us. So we use this tool to apply it to the 3 Indlulamithi scenarios. To consider alternative use of available policy tools, simulate the impact of those choices, and look at the key indicators in order to conclude whether, which mix of policies is likely to put us in different scenarios, Indlulamithi scenarios. So I'm going to go over this, the 3 scenarios, the exercise around the 3 Indlulamithi scenario, and the mix of policies that we think that are, and the direction of policies that are associated with those outcomes. So starting with the first scenario, the Isubujwa scenario. Now, this scenario is looking at, in this scenario, the policy, the idea is that it is the policy status quo is expected to continue after the 2019. Macroeconomic supply side kind of measures are used to get the economy on a higher economic growth, and macroeconomic austerity kind of focused approach is used to reduce debt by cutting expenditures. So in this scenario, if you're familiar with the narrative of the scenario, as a result, performance of the economy continues to more or less resemble to the period before 2019. So the next 12 years more or less end up being similar to the period before 2019, with the economy more or less stuck in low growth and benefiting the rich more than the poor. So while this provides more or less the overall economic policy framework that informed the Isubujwa scenario. We wanted to look at more specifically in terms of more specific example of policy measures that are policy choices that makes that outcome happen. We developed and simulated the model to test those. For example, on the issue of, on the policy groups, on the macroeconomic policy, this is basically a austerity-focused scenario. So there is restrictions on the investment, public investment, general government investment on the infrastructure and social infrastructure. There is the Reserve Bank continues to apply strict adherence to the inflation targeting. Public corporations also grow slowly annually, and that defines basically the major tenets of the macroeconomic policy, type of macroeconomic policy, and the bourgeois that are, that we identify. In terms of social policy, under this scenario and this outlook for the country for the next 12 years, basically the phase 4 of the EPWP is introduced in 2019, basically a continuation, no change in the relative to the previous phase. The Social Security program remains unchanged, and the no new major social policies are advanced during the next 12 years. The focus of a lot of the focus of the policies are on macroeconomic supply side, or what is called structural reforms, and that means there's a lot of focus of the on raising competitiveness increasing the performance of the tourism sector, increasing exports of the agriculture sector, increasing the labor productivity of a number of strategic sectors, and reducing the price of transportation and communication, adopting measures to achieve these as a way of achieving higher growth while the macroeconomics are being kept at more restricted form. Now, what this basically take us in terms of, we use these mix of policy scenarios that they described, simulated the model based on those interventions. These interventions are very specific. And they are in the book that you have, they are, in each scenario, they are very specifically, there's a box for each of these mix of scenarios. And then what we get is that when you simulate for the next 12 years and see where we will be, what would be the performance of the economy and the poverty impact of this, we find that this mix of scenarios, this mix of policies provide the economy with a less than 3% GDP growth, which is what the bourgeois is looking at. The per capita income, real per capita income, is partially increases from about 56,000 right now in real terms to about 67,000. Employment goes up by about 5 million. Unemployment goes down from 27.5% to about 24%. And poverty rate goes down from about 38% to 27%. So by 2030, under this set of scenarios, this set of choices in terms of macro, micro, and social policies, what we have is that unemployment has come down by only a few percent, but we still are sitting at 24% unemployment rate. Poverty rate has come down, but is still high. About 1/4 of the country is still in poverty. The growth is still less than 3%, and as a result of that, the debt GDP ratio remain high, remain high. So we think that this mix of policies are basically underlie or the choice of the approach to the macro, micro social policies underlie the East bourgeois, which is a trickle-down basically scenario on the rest of the economy, and they more or less reflect the working of the economy before 2019. We've done similar things for trying to find out what mix of policies, the same toolbox that we have in terms of economic policy, how can we use it to put us on the neo-Lewak scenario? What can change? We already have macroeconomic policy scenarios about trying to increase the competitiveness and other aspects of the economy. What other things can we do, need to be done to change in order to have to be able to put the economy end up being reproducing some of the features of the neo-Lewak scenario. Now here in this scenario, the story that we have in terms of policy framework that informs the choices around the specific policies is that basically after 2019, the austerity approach that has been followed, macroeconomic austerity approach, shifts, gradually give way to growth-oriented approach. Here in this scenario, we use a pro-growth macroeconomic policy where fiscal policy is more, provides higher funding for public investment, for general government investment in economic and infrastructure and social services. Monetary policy supports economic growth and eases access to credit by the private sector. Social policy is directed toward creating part-time public works for unskilled, unemployed, and lowering poverty. Trade and industry policy is centered on a social contract where corporations get support to get bigger, export more, in return for creating more. In return for creating more good-paying jobs in the country. PIC, Public Investment Corporations, adds about 100 billion in the next 5 years invest in manufacturing sector, and the PPGI, the Public-Private Growth Initiative, invests 500 billion in the economy over the next 10 years. This combination of moving from bringing these are, we think that these pro-growth policies and changes in social and trade and industry policies and private investments helps the economy, can help the economy move to be propelled into the narrower walk. Now, in terms of the specifics, we go further than pronouncements in this area and identify specific policy measures and simulate those to see whether they are, this statement, this characterization can provide us that kind of, what kind of indicators, results do we get if we follow this scenario. So as a result of this, we build on the macroeconomic structural reforms that are underway, that the scenario continues with the thinking of the structural adjustments, structural changes that are needed in terms of achieving more exports in the agriculture sector, expansion of the tourism, more competitive sectors in terms of productivities and lower prices for communications and transportation. All of that macroeconomic reform that we talked about in previous scenario, we think that will still continue after 2019. But in addition to that, we think that there are changes that are taking place more in terms of the macroeconomic policy here that augment those measures. In here, for example, on the issue of the trade and industry policy, the industrial policy measures such as the various industrial financing incentives succeed in increasing total investment in manufacturing by 10 billion annually. We think that the trade and industry measures that are used for SEZ and African integration helps exports of South Africa to go up by about 1.5% additional growth. We think that we use the scenario of proudly South Africa and localization policies that we say, what if they succeed in increasing reducing the import dependency ratios of the manufacturing sector in South Africa by 20% over the next 12 years. So we think these are specific policy measures that we test their ability through the model to affect the economy. On the macroeconomic side, we move from that strict, the scenario that was more looking at the macroeconomy to be more strict. Here, allowing the more investment in by the public sector in the economic and social infrastructure, 10% per year. We're looking at the Reserve Bank to use monetary policy tools to contribute to the goal of achieving a growth of 6% with a higher target for upper limit of the inflation rate. We're allowing that we do what if consider monetary authorities also adopt measures needed to raise the annual growth of credit extension to private sector, both households and the business, to 15%, something that was existing before between 1994 and 2008. It was 15.3. In the last 9 years, credit extension to private sector has halved. It's about 7.5%. So we say, what if we have for the SMMEs growth in other industries, we allowing government current expenditures to also grow annually by additional 3% in order to provide more financial support for the delivery of social services, for health, education, greening of the economy, and other sanitations and other services. In terms of social policy, we also look at the we do what-if scenarios regarding, for example, the public works program. We say, what if government looks at public works program as an employer of last resort for the unemployed, unskilled? There are about 6 million unemployed in South Africa right now that have less than matric education. So the economy, at the same time, the economy not only does not generate enough employment, but it's becoming more skill intensive. So in order to create more livelihood for those who have less chance on getting a job within the labor market, so what if the government gradually moved the EPWP toward the employer of last resort, paying 160 rands per day? And in terms of the social security, we say, what if the government introduces a caregiver grant for families that provide care for those who receive child support grant or care dependency grant. So then that's in terms of the social policies that we look at, and then we examine those to the model. And in terms of private sector, as I mentioned, we have two scenarios that are also we look at for the private sector, that under this scenario, under the Nailo Walk scenario, we say, well, the PIC invests about 100 billion over the next 5 years in the manufacturing sector, and the PPGI is able to invest 500 billion in various economic sectors over the next 10 years. There are also assumptions about the external factors. We use these scenarios to run the model, look at the indicators, and these are obviously, there have been a lot of trial and error in the process to refine these scenarios and also keep them within reasonable measures. And as a result of this, we have this mix of scenarios provides us the following in terms of outcome, which we think is consistent with the Nailo Walk scenario. And we think, therefore, these are the kind of scenarios that are consistent with that kind of vision for the country. So in this scenario, the average annual growth rate over the next 12 years will be around 5.7%. The real per capita GDP almost doubles, or more than 80% almost doubles over the next 12 years. The debt GDP ratio, as the economy is growing faster, starts going down. By 2030, it will decline to about 30%. There are more spending on social programs such as NHI, free higher education, greening of the economy, and other social and economic services expand during this period. More budgets, obviously, partly because of the higher growth, also create higher tax revenues and others, and therefore will enable these these expenditures to take place. Unemployment reduces by about 60% from 27.5% in 2019 to 12.3% by 2030. And poverty rate declined by approximately 2/3 from 38% in 2019 to 13%. So we think that this mix of policy scenarios of macro, social policy, private sector, and trade and industry type of scenarios that are very specific measures, as they are simulated and we looked at, we see it will provide the kind of output in terms of macroeconomic performance, job creation, and poverty reduction that are in line with, can underpin the Nailo Walk scenario. Now, we have a third scenario, which is the Gwara. What type of mix of policies or options can put us on that path? And here, the thinking that is behind the specificity of the scenarios is that in this period, then after 2019, the narrative behind this is that after 2019, the new government's main focus would be on uprooting estate capture, but also as a means, it is being understood as also as a means to reignite the economy. That if the corruption is uprooted, that provides better sentiments and investments and growth. So there is understanding that, therefore the policies, the economic, status quo policies of the past continues. The same as is bourgeois type of, initially as is bourgeois type of scenario. Supply side macroeconomic policy measures, austerity focused macroeconomic policies continues. And as a result of this, you have less and less income trickle down to the population, to the majority of population, as the MTEF type of austerity-focused approach imposes annual cuts in real spending on social services and government transfers. Then we think that part of this would be that after 2024, this is not after 2024 election and there a coalition government, then there is an increasing talk of shock therapy from some key ministers. This coalition government is even more looking at as the situation is the major problems in the economy. They're looking at a shock therapy as a solution to the problem. Consequently, measures are being adopted to withdraw state subsidies, cut public works program, reduce the real value of social grants, privatize more of the SOEs, abandon by South Africa and localization policies, cut taxes, and adopt more restrictive inflation targeting. And as an outcome of these, we see measures the country move on to what we call an immiserizing growth path, with the rich getting richer while the poor getting poorer. Now, this is the kind of like economic thinking behind this period and the guara, where things can get worse, that can lead to. Then the challenge we have is that, well, what specific policies this translates to? Can actually measures lead to that? What choices on those micro social policies are being made with that kind of thinking that will lead to worsen with the guara condition? Here, for example, under this period, under this scenario, the industrial policy measures that we had in the other scenarios, such as subsidies on products and productions and various industrial financing, are discontinued. The government's proudly South Africa and localization policies are phased out. In terms of macroeconomic policy, it's more even becoming more austerity focused. That the even less than inflation increase in the government public investments and also government consumption expenditure. Household income tax for the top, for the brackets 4 to 7 is dropped by 2%, with the thinking that it is, we got to cut the taxes of the rich in order to help the economy grow. That's the shock therapy type of thinking. And investment by public corporations also grows slower than before, than other scenarios. Monetary policy here is also adhere to inflation targeting, but even goes farther than the current, and this adopts 4%, the highest ceiling for the inflation rate. In terms of social policy, I'm sorry, I forgot to give you the, this was the macroeconomic that I was just going to. In terms of social policy, the annual number of EPWP jobs, public works jobs, are halved by 2019 for the new phase of the EPWP, and also annual adjustment of the amount of all social grants is limited to 3%. Now, these are not the kind of, these are specific scenarios, took a good amount of time to gradually build, to look at different So it's not like we sit down and we came up with all of these scenarios, the specifics at one point, and here we run it and the results are done. It's because the same way that there is no silver bullet to solve all the problems with one, there's a mix of micro social policies and others that have come together for things to go right or for things to go wrong. And here an example of things going on, whether in terms of macro or in the micro pulling out, or industry, trade and industry, or social policy going a different direction. So when we run the model on this set of scenarios, then the output of what we get in terms of the direction of the indicators and output, the growth will drop to below average annual growth rate, drops to less than 2%. Unemployment rate remains above 26% and sometimes more than 30% some years. Poverty rate, we have approximately 1/3 of the population remain in poverty over the 12-year period. Real per capita GDP grows slowly, very slowly, by 1.1%, and income inequality increases. And we think that these outcomes and the kind of thinking and those policy choices also represent what the Gwara type of scenario for the country can be. Now, that's basically what we're finding out. Therefore, as a result of, I think, one of the things about takeaway from this exercise is that basically policy, it's a choice. The future depends on the choices and decisions we make. And even though the past cannot be changed, the future is yet in your power. It's clearly how we use the choices that we have on economic policy side. It can have influence. It's not the only determinants of where the economy, where the society evolves to, but it is one of the important factors in terms of the direction of the growth and development of the country. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asker. Now, Dr. Asker was working very closely with our former Statistician General, Mr. Paddy Lihotla, who's just joined us. Welcome. Now, that might have seemed like a very long presentation, but as Dr. Asker has alluded to us, that it provides us with options, policy options. So especially after the presentation by Tara, which was quite depressing, now that we've seen where we are 1 year down the line, what are the options? What are the different policy combinations can we opt for to drive us to the desirable scenario? Now, when we launched last year, we decided that we're going to ensure that all the 3 pillars of our democracy take these scenarios seriously. At the launch, we had the President of the Republic delivering the keynote address. This year, we've shifted towards the 2nd pillar of our democracy. And it was interesting when we briefed the Honorable Chief Justice Mogoeng, who is going to deliver our keynote address today. When we briefed him last year before launching, he was so excited that there were people out there who are also thinking like him. Without wasting any more of your time, I'd like to invite the Honorable Chief Justice Mogoeng to deliver the keynote address.
Miss Kolelwa Kashekatia, all of our people and institutions that have taken time to reflect on what it would take to turn our country around, and by extension our continent. All of us who have decided to come and support this exercise, I greet you all. I was in Cape Town earlier today. I only left in the afternoon. And at some point, I switched to channel 404. And I saw my sister, Kolelwa, sharing some reflections on what Indlulamithi was all about. Unfortunately, it was almost at the time, but there is something she said or something that appeared to be attributed to her that I picked up which struck me, and it was seeking a better South Africa. So the few reflections that I'm going to share are, among others, governance. Any country and any institution that has made meaningful progress owes that progress to the leadership it has. If you have a leader whose vision rises far above the trees, like a giraffe, then you're going somewhere. But only in a positive sense, because some of these visions really do rise above the highest of trees in the most destructive way. Think about it. Think of any country or about any country that has made admirable progress in the area of governance, in the economic and social sector. There's a leader attached to that progress. Excited, I think it was last year or year before, having visited China for the first time, I had a meeting with our current president, and I just couldn't stop talking about my experience in China because the picture that I had before I went there was of a hopeless country of directionless people who do nothing but oppress their people, and there's nothing good that you can learn from them. So I was impressed. And he said to me, Deng Xiaoping. I said, who is that? He says, that's the leader who was treated unfairly by Mao Zedong, although they initially worked together. But during his exile, he spent quality time doing what those involved in this exercise are doing, reflecting on the different scenarios that would facilitate progress and good governance in every sphere of life in China. So if there be anything fundamentally good in China today, you would be told it is not so much about what Mao Zedong did. He laid some solid foundation, solidified the party, but the visionary leader to be emulated is Deng Xiaoping. I wasn't surprised, therefore, to learn from the media that our president is busy reading his book written by, is it Vogel or Vogel? Pardon my pronunciation. Think about that, whether it's Singapore, whether it is South Korea, wheresoever meaningful progress has been recorded, it's all about sound leadership and good governance. Which brings me to the next point. I've realized that it really isn't that difficult to win an election and become a president because of the factors that facilitate a successful electoral campaign. It largely depends on the kind of structure you have in place and who you are connected to, how deep their pockets are. You can become a successful toy that is catapulted into a serious leadership position, depending on who you are linked to, which means something needs to be done about determining who is qualified to even run for office in the first place. Because if a number of these successful countries, not all of them, screen first who is allowed to contest for a high leadership position. Only thereafter can you begin to amass the necessary resources to contest for that position when your capacity for leadership has been tested and proven. Meaning, in a South African context, where the inequalities you have so well highlighted are a reality that is going to be with us for a very long time to come, I think we need to begin to reflect on whether people should be funded by individuals and companies, or whether we should do it differently. I think maybe we should interrogate the possibility of the state itself funding those identified through a proper selection criteria without being unduly discriminatory. Have a decent budget for that all-important project, because, one, elections don't come every year. Even if it were to cost billions to fund those that are going to be players in the electoral process, be it local government, national or provincial, it is a sacrifice worth making for the sake of the good governance that our country cries out for. So if you were to budget, say, what? I don't know whether it would cost 5 or 10 billion to do that once in a while, just so that people don't get their confidence or trust secured behind closed doors. They get in here, wonderful promises, none of them are implemented, and you're surprised, but what happened? He's not allowed to, or she is not allowed to. I keep on saying, we've got to be very careful. Abraham Lincoln defined democracy as a government of the people, and by the people and for the people, but if care is not taken, it will soon be, and I know it offends many, it will soon be a government of the rich, by the rich and for the rich. And there's got to be a remedy identified for that possibility that could exclude many capable leaders who would help us to get to where we want to be. One of the things that you've touched on in your work is social solidarity and sacrifice as a central value that could be embraced by South African society. And I think we should, because where greed is allowed to run wild, inequality can only grow. Let me explain myself. We've got some business enterprises, and I'm very careful not to generalize here, that cause environmental impact reports to be presented to government in compliance with the regulatory framework. Their businesses are allowed to operate in certain communities. I'm not too sure whether it's as a result of laziness or whether it's as a result of a plan that implementation is not allowed to happen or enforcement is not allowed to happen. The result is your cyclone Idai and any other devastating cyclone that you can think of. It happens even in South Africa. Our environment is highly toxified. People are suffering, particularly the poor. They are the victims in this country and everywhere else whenever the damage that we cause to our environment as a result of our insatiable appetite for money remains uncontrolled, unchecked. You can't talk about social solidarity and sacrifice in any meaningful way without factoring into that value or that consideration, human life. I don't know how I would be able to live with myself if I undertake to improve the lives of the people in a community within which I operate, and yet do nothing more than a semblance of compliance with my social responsibilities to the community whose minerals I'm mining or in whose land I'm running my industry. So, I think all the harm that has happened to humanity and the land we live in demands of each and every one of us to reflect on just when are we going to be in a position to sacrifice. Not much, can still enjoy a lot of profit without allowing human life to be compromised as much as it has been in South Africa and elsewhere, in pursuit of more and more and more money. I think we would all do well to reflect on, is it the former owner of Apple said, there was a message of his that was making the rounds in social media. But the bottom line was, with all the $7 billion American dollars that he is worth, he has come to terms with a reality lying on his sick bed, that there is more to life than money. Money is good. I want to have it, but not at the expense of other people's lives. Whether they are my relatives or not is neither here nor there. Think about corruption, think about fraud, think about robbery, think about anything foundational to that harmful practice or conduct is greed. You want to take from another, even if it might be the only thing they have. You don't care. You want to take that car that they are driving, even if it might be the only one they have and need to run their small business so they can survive. You don't care. The principle is the same. It doesn't matter at what level of greed you have graduated to or you operate. The bottom line is, you're just driven by greed. You can't get enough of it. Social solidarity and sacrifice demands of all of us. If what Indlulamithi, this project is all about, is to be implemented, I think we need to move from a theoretical perspective to a more practical approach to the challenges that confront us. There's got to be values that we not just talk about, but that we teach at home. Most of the problems that we have, whether it is crime, whether it is tribalism, ethnicity, racism, gender discrimination, xenophobia, would have been significantly reduced, I believe, had we made it our business as early as 1994. To say, you know, one of our problems was racism, and we were made to despise one another on the basis of the tribe that we belong to. That is why we had this many homelands. What are we going to do in a programmatic way to uproot this thing, because it's not going to be taken out of our society or lives by the mere fact that we have a highly progressive constitution in place. But it's never too late. Ways must be sought of capacitating parents, early learning centers, primary schools, any institution of learning, so that we at least make it our business and we can look back 5, 10 years to come on how far our project of ensuring that values that are critical to peaceful coexistence, hatred for crime and corruption, have been instilled in our children and in us. It's never too late. If adults can meet for the first time, different racial groups, and marry, I think we've got to be learning from those people, those of us who have maybe subconscious prejudice. And it does cut across both ways. I'll never believe that it's impossible for a black person to be a racist. May not be possible to oppress economically, but you may be a racist. I cite an example quite often of some people that I was with in Australia. We entered the lift. As we left, I said, oh, I didn't greet this white lady. So these people are the same. Even if we had greeted her, she would never have responded. And then we got to another lift. We were first to get in. We were three. A white lady comes and says, hi, guys. So I look at them. So these people are the same. Values. If you were to be asked, what values define the people of South Africa? What would you say? Not those that are supposed to, but those that actually define them. You go to Japan, you go to China. They've got their mistakes like all of us. Go to Rwanda. Go to Ethiopia now because of a new leader. The difference is evident. So we've got to be more practical about the values that needs to be instilled. We need to talk more, I think, about our educational system. Why do we have education? What are we teaching? This one that you can pass with 30%. Where are we seeking to go? And what is it that has convinced us that in the manner we go about things, we will get there? What do we prioritize? Do we really prioritize science and technology? Since there's talk about fourth industrial revolution, and it's a good discussion. But what is it that we are doing in a practical and informed way to facilitate the attainment of that noble or laudable objective? Crime and corruption. Why do we have so much crime? Is it because of poverty, inequality, and so on and so on? Do the police have the skills they need to do their job? Who trains them? Where was he or she trained? What track record is there to show that this is a person with the capacity to train? Do you have enough of them? Why are they committing suicide? How are those challenges being addressed so that they are a happy people who are not frustrated by a call that says, there's trouble here, please come and help? Are we talking about this absence of vehicles that they need to move from one place to the other? What mechanisms are there to ensure that the rotten apples are rooted out? Are we talking about it? Or are we very selective in identifying topics that needs to be discussed? Do we allow some thinkers out there to do the thinking for us, and we lazily allow ourselves to think about what others think we ought to be thinking about? We are thought leaders, and you can never be a thought leader if all you ever do is check what is in the newspapers, what is on television, what is on Twitter. Where is your own originality? When are we ever going to read about not what you are channeled to think about, but something completely new and original that would help us to find practical solutions to the challenges that confront us? I think part of the problem is, part of the reason why I think there isn't much change is that we keep on doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. Who ever talks in a more meaningful way about strikes by teachers at a time when children ought to be taught? In a constructive way, seeking even to engage those who are involved to understand where they come from. How much do we soberly reflect on the quality of those who teach our children. Because it must be a criminal offense for somebody who can get my child to read or write to be teaching and getting paid for that. A child can't read after having been in class for an hour. What have you been doing? And how are we going to address that? Good people, I know you are all highly intellectual people. You read big books. But believe you me, it is very basic solutions that are going to get us somewhere. Something like, why does government not have money? Forget about the stealing part. Why does government not have money? Well, I understand that there are many who are stealing. I don't have the evidence. I work on the basis of evidence. A colleague of mine who is a judge president almost arrived late at a meeting, one of these meetings that I convene from time to time of the leaders of the judiciary. So I said to him, oh, so even your blue lights couldn't help you? I mean, when really there's a need as judge president, you should at least switch them on. He says, I don't have them. I said, what happened? He said, I decided to find out first how much it would cost if I were to pay from my pocket for these blue lights. They said 12,000. I said, how much would it cost if the state were to do it for me, as they are supposed to? They said 88,000. And that was quite sobering, because it is not just about blue lights. There are many buildings that the state ought to be owning now, that they are still paying rental for, because it benefits some people for these long leases to continue. I have heard of a person who had nothing, signed a 10-year lease agreement with a particular department in a particular province, and a guarantee to take to the bank to say, this man has nothing, but we guarantee to pay if only you can lend him money to buy a building. Bought a building. Within a year or 6 months, the building was paid up. For the balance of the 10 years, the state is paying. How much money would we be saving so that we can address those critical challenges that the state doesn't have money for? At national level, provincial, local government, there are buildings that are leased to the state at shockingly high prices. I'm not trying to take people out of business, but I think, considering that the Minister of Finance told us, was it last year or earlier this year, that we borrow 10 billion rands every day, I think we should be approaching those people and saying, please, you know our situation. Let's determine the market value we want to pay. This thing must come to an end now. We are going to own it. We will refurbish it ourselves. A pen to government is worth probably 5 or 10 times more than it is worth to you as an individual. Why can't we talk about these things and put an end to them? I raised them at some stage with my counterparts at the right level. To be precise, I raised them with the president and the heads of parliament. I said, we're wasting a lot of money by leasing buildings in circumstances where we don't have money to lease them. Even tenders. We talk about unemployment, inequality, poverty. Why should one individual get a tender for 100 million when there are so many who are unemployed? Can't we develop a strategy, even if it is with the facilitation of the NYDA, I think it is? Groom people. Let them form close corporations or associations or something. A number of young people, prepare them for future possibilities, when there is a tender that runs into so many millions, let it be awarded to this association. They can even be supervised so that nobody wants to hurriedly buy a BMW after the tender. And let there be sharing. Why should one individual get a billions worth of tender under these circumstances? Why can't there be a radical paradigm shift for the sake of the unemployed, some of whom are even graduates? I think a more pragmatic approach is called for in the manner that we do things. At some point, I think we must be bold enough to say that social grants are unsustainable. We've got to get to the point where we can't just abandon people, but we've got to think about how do you separate those who truly can't survive without social grants from those who could work, if only opportunities for them to work rather than wait for social grants were created. We may inadvertently be creating another nation that will forever be dependent on what they are given by the state without any incentive to reach out to that talent, that potential that is lying dormant within, to either start a small business or till the soil. I think I may have spoken for a long time, but let me just touch on unity. People, I think the time has come for us to be united as a nation. Remember, one of the reasons why our people were killing each other was disunity. We allowed race and ethnicity to divide us, and many lost their lives. The collective wisdom that is here, and in many other gatherings that happen every week, is able to come up with a solution through which we could address the disunity that seems to reign in this country. Strategies. How do we create platforms for us to ventilate our frustrations and anger at each other? Allow people to even swear at each other in a room like this. Let them take it out so that you know how to approach this problem, so that you know what programs to craft, so that this thing can be more meaningfully dealt with. But we are running away from it because it's highly sensitive. I think the time has come for us to creatively confront this thing on a daily basis. It doesn't help having one meeting after the other talking. We've got to leave every meeting saying, okay, as an individual, what am I going to do? Who am I going to talk to about these problems? What about gender-based violence? What is it that we can do? What are the faith-based organizations doing? How do we challenge them to assume this critical responsibility that they ought to have assumed a long time ago, but they seem to be dilly-dallying around it? So, the police, prosecuting authority, the judiciary, and by the way, all institutions need to be capacitated to do their work. Let's go deeper and check what exactly are the problems there, so that even as we criticize, it's not at a superficial level. We grapple with the challenges that confront them. We know what is it that renders it difficult for them to do what they are supposed to do, and come up with constructive suggestions to address these problems. The media must be challenged, I think, to feature the solution bearers that are here from time to time, to share with the nation what is it that each and every one of us could do to help solve the problem. And let me conclude by saying we must own up to the individual and collective responsibility that rests on our shoulders. It's a great country. I'm told, well, reading a book, Dare Not Linger, by Mandla about Mandela. Part of what President Mandela says there is this. When he came into government, we owed 245 billion rands, among other debts. Then he was approached by the managing director of the World Bank, I think it was the World Bank, said we can lend you money under very wonderful circumstances. Consulted then Deputy President Mbeki and others, they said no ways. But the long and short of the story is, I was reliably informed that when President Mbeki stepped down, we were in positive territory, so to speak. That's leadership for you. But something happened. I don't know how much we owe now. But it can be reversed if we all have the willpower to say uncomfortable things without meaning harm. You know, when a person is genuine in their criticism, it'll hit you hard because that nerve has been touched. But when you are alone, it'll dawn on you that this person really wasn't attacking me. The person is challenging me to do things differently so that we can take our people and our country and our continent and the global community forward. So I think we must stop assuming that government has all the answers. They don't. They are ordinary human beings like you and I. But if we come up with these solutions and sell to them, and in every platform that we are privileged to speak from, share some ideas. Some will be rejected or all may be rejected, but ultimately, some of them will be appreciated and people will run with them. So may we leave this meeting determined in our small spaces, in our circles of influence, to be difference makers. May we refuse to be led by negativity. May we have a vision that is so superior that not even a tree, however tall, can obscure. Hold on to it. You will never run short of people who are well-meaning, who are right-thinking, who love this country, who love fellow human beings, who understand even when people are mean to them, that it's part of human nature. You'll come across people who are determined to embrace anything that can move us forward. I think it will be a great shame if this rich country, this beautiful country, goes down and we think we can blame others for it. You and I have what it takes to salvage this country from destruction and to ensure that our country is never labeled as yet another African country. There's nothing wrong about being an African country, but there is everything wrong about greed, about criticizing always but never coming up with solutions that can take us forward, about the love for power and fame, because you will always pursue anything, however immoral it may be, as long as you may be remembered when high positions or favors become available. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I hope I didn't insult you. I hope I've encouraged you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Justice. No, you did not insult. You actually inspired us. Actually, when we left your office last year, you instructed us to ensure that we tell the fundamental truths. And that's what we've always been striving to do, to ensure that there are no elephants in the room, that these silent agreements or disagreements are dealt with and add out openly. Now, with that said, it would bring us to the end of our program. However, before we go to Andile, who's going to close this program by giving a word of thanks, can you please look at our feedback sheet you all have on your tables? Please be reminded that this is a launch because we are launching this book. And so we don't have a Q&A session. So those of you who would like to engage with the presenters today, you will receive the material, but also a lot of detail is contained in the book. And if you have any insights or any suggestions, criticisms, and so on, please provide us with the details. We said it before that this is a co-creation process, so whatever you put down on paper, we will analyze it, we will take it seriously, and we will ensure that going forward, we include it or we consider it. That brings me to the end of my role for today. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you very much for being settled and staying in the room, even though it was quite a long program. There were some glitches, and we also started late. So with that said, I would like to welcome Mr. Indlulamithi to close this session for us.
Thank you very much, Xolelwa. A day like today has been made possible by several people whom we should all thank. I'd like to thank the steering committee members for their tireless efforts in guiding this process, continuously raising the game through creating space for all of us to think the impossible, imagine the imaginable, and to encourage us all to engage with all key stakeholders across the board to bring to bear the outcomes that we have witnessed here today. I'd like to thank Chief Justice Mogoeng for his address this evening. We are very inspired by your leadership, your courage, and your call to us all to work and take collective responsibility in creating a better future for all South Africans. You have been a shining light, a beacon of hope and inspiration to us all. We salute you and give thanks for gracing this occasion with your presence. The journey of making the scenarios more public and owned by all South Africans continues and is ongoing. With the assistance of the work currently being undertaken by Deloitte on a pro bono basis to Indlulamithi, we are excited and confident that we will be able to extend the reach, coverage, and footprint of the Indlulamithi Scenarios work. What we all need now is to continue being seized and energized by the choices that we need to make as South Africans to engender a national collective spirit that will propel us to reach greater trajectory that will lead us to a socially cohesive society. This is possible if we all work together to achieve it. Future is a choice. We can choose the future scenario we want and work hard in ensuring that it is actualized, realized in our lifetime. By the same token, by not choosing a scenario, we have also made a choice about the future. The important question that lies before us all today is, what is the future that we want our children to inherit? What legacy do we want to bequeath to our children? We are standing in the threshold of history, wherein lies within us the power, the courage, the vision, the conviction, and the ambition to exercise our influence to decide on creating a country which is socially cohesive and where there is inclusive prosperity for us all. We ourselves are the beneficiaries of what our forebears, through the sacrifices, the painful choices that they have made, were here today as benefiting and enjoying the freedoms that we have never had before. We are therefore the ones that are now entrusted with the responsibility on our shoulders to make the choices that must create positive, lasting, and enduring benefits for the next generation of leaders that come after us to enjoy. Let us make sure that in choosing the future we want, we co-create it together with all South Africans across all races, gender, religion, or creed, where the outcome is a compact that is reflective of the mosaic nature of the South African society. We must continue to lift our hopes, our spirits, unleash our true and deep desires to achieve a world and a country that is much better than the one that we have inherited. Indlulamithi is encouraging, propelling our minds to look above the trees, to look beyond the horizon, to search deep within us of what is possible, to work tirelessly with diligence, hard work, and dexterity to allow the brighter future we want to come forth and become a reality to happen in our lifetime. Finally, I'd like to thank our sponsors, KPMG, amongst others, the organizing team, everyone who contributed in making today possible. This task would not have been achieved with such brilliance and excellence had it not been for your dedication, commitment, and diligence. We greatly appreciate all that you have done. To all of our guests for your attendance in today's event, we would like to express our sincere appreciation and gratitude. A light supper has been prepared for you, which has been set up as outside of the venue for you to enjoy and share with us. Thank you very much for your attendance. Have a good evening and a great weekend. Thank you very much.